Hello, welcome to episode 12. I'm Christelle and this is Cosmic Clinique, and this is where we speak about so many things pertaining to astrology, but also connected to being a founder, a creator, and how to really tap into our unique selves when it comes to our minds, our thinking, our processes, how we execute, and also tapping into timing, the cosmic timing. But today, before we begin, I just want to say thank you for being here and listening to me. It's such an honor to just have your time, so thank you. But I also want to start a little differently because I like to have just these funky beginnings of my episodes. And it's basically not by asking you to slow down immediately, but by asking you to notice something specific. So, when you try to explain something important to someone, what happens? Do the words come easily? Or do they feel like there's something you understand internally, but translating it feels harder than it should? Just notice that for a moment. Because what we're talking about today is that space, the space between knowing and being able to say. Yes. Today I want to talk about Mercury in Pisces, the very placement that I have, by the way, but obviously that many people in the world have. And I want to talk about it properly, not just in a simplified way it's often described, but in a way that actually helps you understand how this mind works and how to work with it. Because Mercury in Pisces is one of the most misunderstood, beautiful placements in astrology. And I say that not just as an observer, but from experience. It's often described as confused, unclear, scattered. Does that remind you of someone? And while those experiences can exist, they are not the core of the placement. They are what happens when this placement is misunderstood. And at its very core, Mercury in Pisces is not a weak mind. I must stress this, okay? It's a non-linear mind. It doesn't think in straight lines. It doesn't process information step by step. It processes information in layers, in associations, in impressions, in meaning rather than structure. And that changes everything. And the reason why it's like this astrologically is because Mercury is actually in full and in detriment in Pisces. But let's continue. So if you imagine most systems of thinking are as structured pathways. So if you imagine most systems of thinking as structured pathways, clear steps from one point to another, Mercury in Pisces is more like a field. Yes. Information moves through it. It connects in unexpected ways. It forms patterns that are not always immediately visible. And from a neuroscience standpoint, this often looks like subconscious integration, where your brain is taking in far more than you consciously realize. And it's processing it beneath the surface. So by the time you know something, you often don't know how you know it. And that happens to me all the time. So I wonder if you can relate to this. And that's where the difficulty lies. That's where the difficulty begins, because we live in a world that values explanation, values clarity and speed. And Mercury in Pisces doesn't always offer that immediately. It offers depth first. The translation comes second. So this is why one of the most common struggles with Mercury in Pisces is communication. And I know this comes up a lot. So how do you communicate with someone who has displacement? Or if you have it, how do you express yourself more clearly? So let's talk about that practically, because this is not about forcing clarity. It's about understanding the process. If you are communicating with someone who has Mercury in Pisces, the most important thing to understand is this. They are not processing what you are saying in a purely logical way. They are in fact feeling your every word. They are sensing it. They are interpreting tone, energy, subtext. So if you're if you're overly direct, for example, you're overly rigid or overly transactional, in your communication, it just might not land. It might be received as cold, as disconnected, or even overwhelming. And what works better is speaking with context, allowing space, not rushing them to respond immediately, and being mindful of how something is said, not just what is said. For example, instead of saying, just tell me exactly what you mean, you might want to try, take your time. I'm trying to understand what you're feeling or what you're seeing here. So the differences are, far and few between. No, is that the right thing to say? The difference is vast. Sorry, that was my Mercury in Pisces. But that subtle shift changes everything in your communication with that person, because you're meeting them where they are. Now, if you are the one with Mercury in Pisces, the work is slightly different, because your challenge is not understanding, it's translation. And one of the most powerful things you can do is stop expecting your thoughts to arrive fully formed. They often don't, and they often won't. So clarity for you comes through expression, not before it. So speaking things out loud, even when they feel incomplete, is actually part of your thinking process. And writing is powerful for this. So are voice notes, recording ideas, letting things move. Because if you wait until everything feels perfectly structured, you may never express what you want to say. Now, let's talk about the gifts of the placement, because there are so many and they are very significant. Mercury in Pisces has the ability to perceive patterns other people often miss. They understand emotional and psychological nuance. They translate complex or abstract ideas into something meaningful. And they create, imagine, and connect beyond surface level thinking. And this is the kind of mind that excels in so many things like storytelling, healing work, creative direction, intuitive strategy, and anything that requires seeing beyond what is immediately visible. So for founders and creators, this is incredibly powerful, because you are not just building systems. You are sensing what people need. You are understanding what resonates. You are able to create things that feel aligned, not just logical. But the insecurities can be just as strong, let's not deny it, and they often sound like this. I can't explain myself properly. I sound unclear. I don't think in the right way. Or even, I'm not as intelligent as others. I've been saying this my whole life, by the way, that I do not think I'm intelligent. Up until, I've done some work. But either way, these are really, really popular self-beliefs that very often comes with this placement. And I want to be very clear here, because this is quite, very close to my heart, that there is not a lack of intelligence. That is not a lack of intelligence. Mercury in Pisces does not mean that. That is a difference in processing. So if you have displacement, there is a difference in the way in which you process next to the logical, rigid world that we live in, okay? But if you measure yourself against linear thinkers, it will always feel like you're falling short, and you're not. Now let's bring in house placements briefly, because this changes how the Mercury in Pisces placement expresses itself. So if Mercury in Pisces is in the 6th house, which is particularly important, this can create a very specific tension. Because the 6th house is about systems, routine, structure, daily functioning. And Pisces is fluid. It's non-linear. It's adaptable. So there can be a feeling of this sense of like, I need to be organized and structured, but my mind doesn't naturally operate this way. And so when you're that's your experience of that placement in the 6th house, it can lead to frustration, it can lead to overwhelm, or feeling like you're constantly trying to fix how you think. The solution here is not rigid structure. It's actually having flexible systems in place, systems that allow movement. For example, loose routines rather than strict schedules, or creating blocks of time rather than fixed outputs, or even environments that support flow rather than control. Because if you try to force rigid structure into a fluid mind, it creates resistance. And obviously the resistance creates feelings of like, I'm not good enough, you know. For other houses, it will shift slightly. So in the 3rd house, it may feel more natural but still abstract. In the 10th house, Mercury in Pisces, it could feel like it becomes part of your public voice, your intuitive communication as your career. So it could be really beneficial from that standpoint. And in the 12th house, it becomes even more internal, more subconscious, more difficult to articulate, but deeply, deeply perceptive. So bringing this back to founders and creators, Mercury in Pisces is not here to compete with linear thinkers. Okay, let's make that clear. It's here to offer something different. Let's make that clear as well. Okay? Your advantage is not speed, it's depth, it's resonance, it's the ability to create meaning. And only you can do that so well. Okay? But for that to work, you need to trust your process. You need to externalize your thinking. You need to stop overcorrecting yourself. And you need to build systems that support your natural rhythm. Because when you do that, something shifts. You stop feeling like you're behind. And you start realizing that you're actually operating in a different dimension of thinking. Now, I hope this has helped in many ways, in some ways, even in minor ways. And I do plan to explore more deeply this particular placement, because I do find on my social media that a lot of natives struggle with this, struggle with confusion around communication and articulation and being understood. And obviously we all want to be understood. But yes, it's an interesting, beautiful placement that I will continue to delve into and to share with you all my understanding of it. But before we close, I want to leave you with something to sit with. If you stopped trying to explain your thoughts in the way you think you should, what does your natural way of expressing actually look like? Where do your ideas come from? How do they form? And what would happen if you trusted that process just a little bit more? Notice that. Just notice that. And I'll speak to you again in the next episode. Thank you so much for being here. God bless. Christelle.